In Tim O'Brien's book, The Things They Carried, various themes and ideas are brought up in Speaking of Courage and Notes. Today we'll be discussing these ideas and how O'Brien develops his own and Norman Boker's characters in their re-entry into society via historical, psychological, and social issue lenses.
Yes! Oh my God!
One of the themes that O'Brien focuses on in his book is what happened to the majority of the soldiers after Vietnam. Many soldiers came home after the war and were traumatized by the war. They could not move past what horrors they saw in Vietnam. They knew that they were responsible and had killed innocent civilians. Many of the citizens of the United States saw the soldiers in a negative light. They had lost the war and were failures to their country. When the soldiers returned, there was no system of support set up by the government in order to ease the soldiers back into society. In modern times, returning veterans are given college discounts and other beneficial methods of giving these soldiers the chance to build a new life outside of the military. However, this was not the case for Vietnam vets. In fact, O'Brien explicitly says, "And there was no place in particular to go," in the chapter Speaking of Courage. O'Brien mentions Bowker almost winning the Silver Star frequently, saying, "I almost won the Silver Star," and had lost the Silver Star. The text focuses on bravery when it says, "And his father would have nodded, knowing full well that many brave men do not win medals for bravery, and others may win medals for doing nothing." The emphasis in this quote is "would have," in that ideally his father would have said that, but in reality, people would think the opposite of what his father had said. The Silver Star symbolizes how the soldiers were expected to do brave, heroic acts, but instead, they served an average tour and had very little awards to show for it. People were disappointed that the soldiers had accomplished very little, covering the same ground over and over.
To add on to what Adam is saying, in Speaking of Courage, O'Brien talks about how Norman Boker followed the tar road on its 7-mile loop around the lake. The important part of this is the idea of the lake road being a symbol for the monotonous life and repetitive nature of the soldier's life post-war. The symbol of the lake road represents the constant loop of trying to talk about the war and being unable to do so, as well as being unable to make any progress towards integrating back into society. This is shown by Boker aimlessly driving around the lake 7 times. He has nothing better to do in his life and seems very isolated. All he can do is observe from his car and is unable to interact with anyone else. O'Brien makes a point to write in several times where Boker wants to talk but can't, such as with the person at the fast food restaurant and the people on the road. Coming back to reality for just a second, after soldiers were unable to talk about the war, they would try to talk to someone else, and they would try to make the effort, but they would fail every time. They couldn't talk to them, and it would always have the same result, thus the endless loop. Another theme in O'Brien's book is how soldiers seem cut off from the rest of society. Soldiers can try and talk about the war, but it isn't anything civilians would understand. Nobody who hasn't experienced the war firsthand can imagine what the soldiers have experienced, and thus there was nothing he could say. Something else to support this would be how the person who takes Boker's order tries to imitate the army jargon, which Boker does not understand. This shows, with the roles switched, how they don't understand each other and are not on the same page. O'Brien also uses monotony of the town to represent the people when he says the town he was touring seemed dead. Through the windows, as if in a stop-motion photograph, the place looked as if it had been hit by nerve gas, everything still and lifeless, even the people. The town could not talk and would not listen. "How'd you like to hear about the war?" he might have asked, but the place could only blink and shrug. It had no memory, therefore no guilt. The taxes got paid and the votes got counted and the agencies of government did their work briskly and politely. It was a brisk, polite town. It did not know anything and did not care to know. The use of this represents how the entire town did not care about the veterans, and also where it says no memory, no guilt, shows how regular people don't truly understand the horrors of the war and don't have the guilt of spilling innocent blood on their hands.
Like Adam was saying, returning soldiers did not have any sort of support system in place to ease them back into the normal human life. When O'Brien wrote The Things They Carried as a work of fiction, he did not intend for the novel to be just a collection of made-up stories. He wanted this book to focus on what could have happened or what almost happened during Vietnam, instead of completely random topics like in most other fictional stories. This gives The Things They Carried a strange sense of realism that conflicts with the reader because we want to believe that what O'Brien is writing about is true, but in reality we know it isn't. In order to fully understand this writing technique, I researched what real U.S. soldiers experienced upon arrival in the many weeks following. A Vietnam veteran named Kubai claims that they were mistreated, and along with this, there is also documented evidence upon many American citizens demonstrating against the arriving soldiers, spitting and cursing at them. In the chapter notes on page 153, the character O'Brien has just written Bowker's biography. A major dilemma that he experiences while writing it, though, is his view on the war. As we know, O'Brien is not and has never been a fan of the war. In the chapter On the Rainy River, it talks about just how he felt, like he had no part to play in the war, as if he were too good to be a soldier. He will implement this view on the war into the biography of Norman Bowker, a soldier who felt that the war was his life, by forcing himself to omit the shit field and the rain and the death of Kiowa. Because of this, Bowker questions O'Brien's writing when given a draft of his biography. These two characters, who had to live with the Vietnam War engraved into their souls, grew completely separate, and I believe that this exemplifies Bowker's reason to kill himself. He feels alone. Not even a fellow soldier can relate to his inner corruption.